Okay, we'll talk more.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Shayma Rashid, and on behalf of the UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, it is a pleasure to welcome you to the first international engagement held by the UAE Climate Change Research Network, CCRN. For those who had not had the opportunity to acquaint themselves with the network, it was originally built with a very clear problem in mind. In the realm of climate change, we want to make a change for the better, but often are unclear in how to achieve it. In the light of the pressing environmental impacts we are already witnessing. And the UAE is not alone here. All over the world, the smartest minds continue to work in search of the next big project, but cannot do much without the support of the greater power. All the while, decision makers in the very powerful position continue to question how to best transition to a sustainable future without compromising the well-being of their countries. The CCRN was built to bridge this gap, aligning science with policy. The network established as a collaborative system by operating as a springboard, bringing the most advanced climate researchers together to help fill the gap, explore the uncharted territory, and adapt the work to the needs of the country. Distinguished guests, today you will be greeted by the heads of this innovative and sophisticated network of experts. Through their experience, you will have the opportunity to understand the goals on the outlook and the experience of the research network as it continues to grow and advance its efforts to guide the UAE journey to sustainability. Although today may not be represent the launch of the network, it has the special significance as the CCRN first international engagement that seeks to disseminate the lesson learned and advocate for the collaborative environment for researchers, policymakers alike. I firmly believe that in the context of the feats this network aims to achieve, there is no better venue than the Conference of the Parties to spread this word. Ladies and gentlemen, we at the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment are proud of the work undertaken by the members of the network and are confident that this event will provide a brand new perspective on the potential for a fruitful collaboration in the field of climate change. I take this opportunity to thank all the network co-chairs, cluster leads, and the support pavilion staff for dedicating their time to bring this series of talk together. I wish you a productive participation in the event, and I look forward to this insightful discussion. I hand over the floor to the co-chair, Dr. Francisco Parapella, and Dr. Fraten Samara, to introduce themselves and offer their views on the network and its future. Thank you.
Should I go first? Good morning. Thank you for being here. I'm really happy to introduce the idea of CCRN. CCRN was born a couple of years ago by the interaction between some scientists that are operating in the UAE and the Ministry of Climate Change that, amazingly, I would say, from the scientist point of view, was extremely responsive to the inputs of the scientists. What we started telling to the ministry is that as scientists, we really need a network in order to connect ourselves. And we also need inputs in order to know what is relevant for policy in our research. And the ministry immediately understood that this was an enormous opportunity. And it was an enormous opportunity, in particular, I would say, for the UAE and the region, because, again, from a scientist's point of view, the challenge in climate science for the next 50 years, for the next century, is really now studying the local and regional scales. We have a very pretty clear picture of what is going to happen at the global scale, at the continental scale. We don't know much about what is going to happen at the local scale, in particular for some regions. And the Gulf is one of these regions where there is a big question mark. If you look at the latest IPCC report, at the IPCC Atlas, which has been compiled through all these huge Earth system models that collectively form the sixth Earth system comparison model, the CMIP6, you will see that many parameters of extreme interest, wind speed, precipitation, humidity, in some regions, and the Gulf is one of those, are extremely uncertain. We don't even know if they're going to increase or decrease. So again, while the global picture is very clear, the local picture is not. And this calls for a greater scientific effort, but on the other hand, it also calls for a continued collaboration with policymakers, because after all, adaptation and mitigation measures do occur at the regional and local scale. And that's why the experience of CCRN, in my opinion, is a unique one, is something that on one hand, it can really lead to great science, and on the other hand, it can lead to great policy because of this intertwined relationship between a scientific body and a government entity. And with this, I can pass the floor to my colleague, Fatin.
Thank you, Francesco, and thank you for the great introduction. So my name is Fatin Samara. I am a professor of environmental sciences at the American University of Sharjah, and I am also the co-chair of the Climate Change Research Network. And I am so happy to see so many faces here today. I think we are in the best time. I think this is a great opportunity. COP27 being, I think, the event where we can talk about what CCRN is to the rest of the world. I think the ministry had a very good idea when they realized that policy cannot be alone, but it has to be hand by hand with science as well. And I believe that this is sort of the goal, that we can work together as a team to be able to base our policies on actually the scientific knowledge. And the UAE is very rich in that aspect. We have a lot of scientists who are doing a lot of excellent work. And we hope that that is sort of the goal, to find all those expertise that are within the region. We don't even have to go so far. And put them together in one venue where they can share those ideas. Our clusters are already speaking. There is a lot of conversation that is going on. There is a lot of projects that are really being pushed forward. And I think that having that venue, having the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment sort of be the support, that is sort of the main goal. And I am really excited to see where we can go. And I'm really excited to see how we can also get your support and contribution, because it is not only science alone. It is industries, it is the private sector, it is the government, it is the educational sector, and not only sciences, right? But we're also talking about the social sciences, the international sciences, we're talking about engineering, we're talking about modelers. So it is just putting all of this together in one specific venue so we can share the ideas and move forward. I think the UAE is doing so much, and I think that we are sort of that hub that is going to take the region to an international level. And I am really glad to see that happen.
Right now, we will have a short video explaining the system of the network, and then later on, we will have an open dialogue moderated by Mafak.
Probably.
Hello. So, testing. Hi. Thank you, everyone. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And I want to thank Shema as well for the really endearing speech and the co-chairs for their introduction. We have to speak more directly. So I'd like to begin by just giving a brief introduction as to who I am as well. So my name is Muwaffaq Al-Khudairi, and I'm an advisor working with GHD, in addition to being one of the negotiators here and a member of the support team of the CCRN. And I think this is an extremely exciting event. I was with the CCRN from the moment of its conception, from the day that it was put together, and the whole idea of the CCRN essentially was for us to try to solve a purpose that I don't think has ever been really tackled in the UAE. The CCRN was put together for us to try to tackle that challenge of trying to identify how we can try to advise our policy through the framework of science. We recognize that we have a lot of decision makers who want to make a change. Everybody wants to make a difference and wants to understand how we're going to be able to tackle climate change. And one important thing to note as well is that everybody here has a stake in climate change. This is a conference decided and designed primarily for stakeholders who have a stake in it to come together to try to identify how we can try to transition away from this situation. The CCRN was put together as a means to try to bring the smartest minds of our country together so that we can try to identify what are the best next steps we could take in order to try to make that transition. Today we have 5 different research clusters who are going to be presented. They're going to show us exactly how we can try to make that shift. We'll be talking a little bit about some of their objectives, some of their goals, their long-term ambitions, and the challenges that they face as well as research clusters. The 5 that we're going to be looking at today include climate data and modeling, climate change and infrastructure, climate change, terrestrial, marine, and freshwater ecosystems, climate change and public health, and climate change and food and water security. We have our 2 co-chairs here with us today, Dr. Francesco and Dr. Fatin Samara, in addition to having 3 of our cluster leads, as unfortunately 2 of them were unable to make it today. But covering for them will be our 2 co-chairs as well where relevant. So with that, I'd like to begin by introducing Dr. Diana Francis, who is currently joining us virtually, and she'll be covering the topic of climate data and modeling. Dr. Diana, this floor is yours. Dr. Diana, if you can also just confirm that you're able to hear us. Okay, so while we try to resolve the situation here, we can try to transition by looking at climate change and public health. So, Dr. Rahaf Hajjaj, if you'd be happy to begin, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Rahaf Hajjaj, Assistant Professor in the College of Health Sciences at Abu Dhabi University. It is a great pleasure to be with you today and to represent my cluster, which is the climate change and public health. So maybe I can give you like a brief introduction about cluster, which I believe it's one of the pillars of the CCRN. Now we all know that a healthy human needs a healthy world to live and to survive, right? So we know that most of the implications that are related to climate change are somehow it's linked to some of the diseases. This could be like directly and indirectly linked to climate change, but we know for sure rising temperature, extreme weather, rising, for example, sea levels, the food insecurity, the quality of the air, the quality of the water, all these implications for sure will have an impact on the health. And that's why comes the CCRN, where it needs like to form a network of researchers and stakeholders who are specialized in public health. And we will working in this cluster in order to find ways to overcome the implications that comes because of the climate change. And we can also be helping the ministry in enhancement of the legislations and policy by providing them with evidence-based information. So this is our main aim and objective of this cluster. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rahaf, as well for that engaging discussion. Now, I'd also like to begin by trying to see if we can maybe have a discussion with Dr. Waleed Ziada. We'll hold off in that case. So the next one we'll go for then will be with Dr. Francesco Paparella, Originally, we had our cluster lead for climate change, terrestrial, marine, and freshwater ecosystems who had planned to join us virtually, but unfortunately is unable to join due to some engagements. So Dr. Francesco will be stepping in as well to cover that in this turn.
Yeah, so I will speak on behalf of John Burt, who is a professor of marine ecology at the University of New York University of Abu Dhabi. And he is the lead of the marine and terrestrial ecosystem and freshwater ecosystems group. And the main point in this group, in this cluster, is that in the UAE and generally in the Gulf region, there are so many different ecosystems, in spite of what one may think. It's a desert. Well, deserts are extremely diverse and ecologically interesting environments, both on land and at sea. But the point is that they are also extremely understudied. We barely know what is out there. What we don't know is how what is out there changes in response to the climate stimulus. We have barely started to scratch the surface. And this line of investigation is inherently interdisciplinary. So for example, a work that I personally did with John was to investigate the relationship between the physical environment and coral reefs. And it turns out, for example, that in the UAE waters, the main cause of coral bleaching are summers with quiet wind. That sounds strange until you think that the evaporation created by wind produces a lot of cooling. You may reach easily 400 watts per square meter. And that cooling really is what keeps the corals alive during the summer. If wind goes down, if in the future we have a downgoing trend in the Shamal winds, the UAE coral reefs will suffer even more than they are suffering now. This is an example of what in situ science that is collaborative, that mixes up the competencies of a marine ecologist and a mathematical modeler can actually reveal. It is also indicative of how little really we know about these environments. Another thing that is emerging out of our research, for example, is that in particular in the summer, there is hypoxia in the Gulf. So the water contains very little oxygen. And this is really unexpected because the water is so shallow. So one may think that the atmospheric oxygen should just go in there easily. And yet our measurements show that in particularly close to the bottom, we are starting to see hypoxic events. Now, is this normal? 50 years ago, did it happen? 100 years ago, did it happen? We don't know because we haven't observed these systems for long enough. So at the very, very basic level, we really need to have a network of observational systems in place that are capable of observing these environments for the long run. Typically, people talk about climate when on timescales longer than 30 years. We don't have 30 years of observations for these environments. If we are lucky, we have 3 years of observation. So we can even start thinking about how they will respond to climate change. We really know very little, and we need to act on this. We need to increase our knowledge.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francesco. And again, I think it's a very interesting discussion as well when you bring up the topic of hypoxia. There's a lot that we don't fully understand in terms of how climate change is going to impact this region as well, but just the more work we put into identifying this data, I think the more we can try to glean and try to work towards as well in the long run. Now, I've come to hear as well that Dr. Diana has been able to connect. So, Dr. Diana, would you like to tell us a bit about the Climate Data Modeling Research Cluster?
Hello, everyone. Good morning. First of all, thank you so much for organizing this great event. I'm very pleased to be with you. Thanks for the ministry also for all the support. and very glad to hear about the launch, the global launch of the CCRN. So I'm Dr. Diana Francis. I'm from Khalifa University in the UAE, and I'm the lead of the Climate Data and Modeling cluster. So this cluster or group of researchers and professors are concerned about how to better collect accurate data, but also how to make our models more accurate for projections. These are two pillars to any climate science, because as you know that in order to have an idea about what's happening to our climate, we need good data, both covering good spatial coverage and temporal coverage. And in order to have accurate projections and to know what will happen to our climate on a regional scale, and as Francisco has said in the beginning, that this is really the hardest part of the projections, we need really very powerful and tested models, which we don't have for now, and that's why working together toward these two objectives is really essential. And there is a lot of momentum in the cluster in order to achieve these two objectives using different ways of collaboration.
Thank you very much, Dr. Diana. And it's just really interesting for me whenever you start talking about modeling as well. Back when I used to work with the Ministry of Climate Change and we had to prepare the State of Climate report, which had a very huge modeling component, we were also very well aware of just some of the challenges that come about with trying to identify some of the regional properties of this general region as well, and just kind of the limitations we have in our models. So we look very forward to what the cluster is going to be able to achieve as well once we bring all of the researchers together. Following up on this one, we're going to be looking now towards Dr. Walid Ziada as well, who is our cluster lead for climate change and infrastructure. Dr. Walid, you have the floor.
Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum, good morning. I hope you are enjoying the COP27 activities so far in Sharm el-Sheikh. I hope also you are enjoying the city as well. So I'm from Egypt, and currently I'm associate professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at the University of Sharjah. Just to give you an idea, a little bit of idea about also my cluster, the climate change and infrastructure. Currently we are 25 members, mainly scientists from local universities, government and the industry, and also we have some international representatives for example, from Europe, Deltares, Netherlands, we have one representative. And just discussing a little bit about infrastructure, because this is my main area of expertise. So as we know all that infrastructure systems are very crucial to any country in terms of economic and also social developments. Okay, and they basically require also massive investments. So I want to make sure that they are performing satisfactorily. In relation to the climate change, actually also you see that those infrastructure systems are among the main contributors to the greenhouse gas emissions. And I will give an example with the transportation infrastructure systems. So actually this system contributes to 27% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. This huge amount of emissions. Also, if you look at the electric power plant, share is roughly like 25%. So those only two infrastructures are responsible for more than maybe 50% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. So that's number one. Number two now, if you look at the relationship between the infrastructure and climate change, it's kind of a closed circle, where, as I told you, the infrastructure contributes mainly to the greenhouse gas emissions, and this in turn will impact the climate change. The climate change then will impact the performance and maybe the efficiency of those kind of infrastructures, which means we have maybe to invest more to make them basically more efficient, to reduce the degradation coming from the climate change, which in turn would increase the greenhouse gas emissions. So I think that it is obvious that the very clear solution is to break this circle and this dependency by proposing more sustainable solutions to our infrastructure, to make them more environmentally friendly. And also in the meanwhile now, because it seems we have a damage already in the ecosystem, so we have to build them to be more resilient to the infrastructure. We have actually like a pioneer research project sponsored by the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure. Also, the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment was part of, like maybe 3 years back. And we're trying to assess the impact of the temperature increase or potential future temperature increases on the resilience and also in terms of performance of the transportation systems. And we're able to capture and assess this kind of impact, and also develop some kind of adaptive strategies, how to mitigate and minimize this impact. And we found this actually has a very positive impact in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, mainly from the materials and operation, construction and operation. And also, in the meanwhile, we were able to build kind of resiliency to our transportation infrastructure to mitigate this kind of, I would say, extreme climate conditions. I gave also another maybe example for the impact of the flooding. This kind of extreme flooding events to the infrastructure in the area, witnessed over the past few years that this kind of extreme flooding are damaging most of these kind of infrastructures. So I think that the whole idea of our cluster is basically to investigate and develop some kind of sustainable policies while building resiliency into the infrastructure. Thank you so much. Muwaffaq, hope you the best, and also the team.
Thank you very much, Dr. Waleed, and again, also for that engaging discussion. I actually find it very interesting as well when you have that note between the relationship between infrastructure and ecosystems as well. And I can imagine that's a really interesting place for you to try to coordinate with the Climate Change Terrestrial Marine and Freshwater Ecosystems Research Cluster, just to make sure that you're aligned in your work and that you can advise on these policies as well that would help guide the country towards a really sustainable set of infrastructure. So thank you very much for that one. All right, so pivoting on to the last one here, we have our fifth research cluster, which is climate change, food and water security. This is led by Dr. Elke Newman. However, she's unable to join us today. So it'll be covered today by Dr. Fatin Samara, our co-chair.
Definitely. So on behalf of Dr. Elke, I believe that one of the main challenges that exists not only at a local level, but at an international level is obviously food and water security. And the UAE is no exception to this. We live in an environment that is very harsh. We have harsh conditions. We depend on desalination as our main source, but also the UAE depends mostly on imports. Almost 90% of the food that we consume comes from imports, and the UAE is trying to try to beat that challenge and try and produce our food. Yesterday, Her Excellency, the Minister of Climate Change and Environment, spoke about how UAE is really advancing in this, how we are able to now grow, she mentioned strawberries, we're able to grow quinoa, and looking into how we can use our saline water to be able to grow our crops, how we are really challenging in terms of aquaculture and others. How can we exploit our freshwater sources? The UAE does not have that many of the freshwater sources. So this cluster really looks into, I think, a very important component when it comes to climate change. As we know, with climate change, food and water security will be even more challenged than I think a lot of other systems in the environment or on Earth. So this is the one that I think we need to put a lot of focus on. Our researchers are already looking into different ways that we can sustainably do agriculture, aquaculture, to improve water systems within the UAE. And I believe that what comes from this specific cluster can also be applied not only at a local level, but it can be also applied at an international level. And if we think about it, this is one of those clusters that will require a lot of collaboration as well, because food and water security is not only the science-based, but we need to look at it in different perspectives. And I think I want to echo what my colleague Francesco said. The clusters are not working alone. They need to also have interrelationships between them, because a lot of what happens within one cluster needs to be supported by another one. And that's the beauty, I think, of CCRN, that we can have all these researchers that can also interconnect and work in an interdisciplinary manner.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fatin. I think that was actually a very nice rendition as well of how the cluster operates. And I think this is a really interesting note as well, because there's a few different ways that, I've come across as well when it comes to food and water security. Not too long ago, we actually had a meeting as well with the Japanese delegation, who told us a little bit about how climate change is impacting their agricultural fields. And they mentioned that even for them, the topic of just food security with agriculture is becoming significantly more challenging, and a lot of their fields are migrating north just due to the change in climatic conditions. And again, pivoting back to that State of Climate report that we mentioned earlier, we noted that groundwater recharge is also expected to decrease in the UAE as a result of climate change. So putting this in perspective, just having an understanding of how things are likely to shift and getting our researchers together and aligned for us to be able to identify how are we supposed to preserve our water, what sort of work can we do to try to help preserve our food systems, will go a very long way. Now, with this, again, I want to thank all the cluster leads and the co-chairs as well for giving us this introduction into their clusters and just into the general network. But I want to pivot this one back to the audience now, just to say that, again, the work that the network is doing is in support of the entire country. All of the different government organizations, the private sector, and so on, you all have a stake that you could make, you can take some benefits from the network for as well. So the idea I want to ask now is, based off of your experience in your institution and some of the challenges that you face, is there anywhere that you feel that maybe the network could potentially support you? Or do you have any experiences that you've learned and just that you can bring back to the network as well to try to guide them and say that this is something that we think the network could benefit from? We'd love to hear from you here in the audience as well. Yep, please go on ahead.
Thank you so much for the presentation and giving us an idea about this network. That's honestly, this is the first time I hear about it. I'm Susanna Al-Massah, Professor of Sustainability and Economics at Zayed University. And I'm leading the sustainability program that we are going to launch next fall. Currently, we have interdisciplinary program at Zayed University. One of them is social innovation, and the other one is business transformation. And most of the faculty are interdisciplinary, and we bring students to be holistic with a holistic approach of dealing with things. So I'll give you a quick example on what we are doing with students to enhance their interdisciplinary approach in research, which is one of the pillars that you have explained in youth inclusion. We build up on assignments on how they figure out market failures, for example. This is modern economic thought. And they learn how to figure out the imperfect market dynamics. And they find out market solutions. And they end up, for example, this assignment, they end up with proposing policy actions for net zero achievement. This is an example on how we build up the mentality or the mindset of dealing with socioeconomic problems with an holistic approach. We work also with students in some competitions related to water, food security, and with the research of the faculty on the same area. We make like research groups and we involve students with them. I think this is a great opportunity where we can collaborate with students, building up their credentials, and with your network definitely would be something great. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you very much I think I have to go. Thank you very much for your contribution as well. And I actually think that, again, talking about that youth component is very interesting. And as you noticed as well earlier in the video, we mentioned that the Climate Change Research Network does also have a division for the youth. So I think, as you mentioned, it's a great opportunity for the youth to develop and to advance. And we recognize that climate change itself is a very complicated field. There's just so much that one could try to absorb, and I think working close in hand with the 5 different research clusters can build a very rounded understanding of it, for sure. I want to pass this back to Dr.
I think I wanted to address this. I think it's so great that you have made that comment, because as one of the next steps, I think, for the network, we want to incorporate the youth. And that is one of our goals, and that's why we have added it. We feel like the youth are the next generation. They're the ones that, if they start early now, they can lead the way. So we invite you to get in touch with us, definitely. We would love to have you and have the youth also join the network and sort of give those ideas, to have that discussion. We would love to meet them, definitely.
Professor, I maybe also add a point here that one of the priority topics at the public health cluster is to have the financial estimation of the climate change and the health impact. So I believe like your expertise will be great for our cluster. So I think we should chat a little bit once I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, can I? If I may jump in, we definitely do need a social science component within CCRN. Right now, we are pretty much all engineers or natural scientists, but it's absolutely clear that we are not going to solve the climate change problems without a social science component. So we do need to think about how the natural environment and the social environment feed back on each other. And for example, you mentioned markets. Market is a tool. We need to have a good think on what this tool can do, what this tool cannot do, what other tools within the social sciences are necessary in order to act in an effective way. So yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. I'm Raidan Al-Saqaf. I'm the economist at the United Nations office in the UAE, and I've had the pleasure of working our esteemed professors, the co-chairs, in multiple initiatives. And I must say that every time I learn more about the network, I'm impressed. We've had some interactions on a number of issues in relation to the policy-science interface, which I think is very profound for us to really deliver on our climate targets. A couple of examples, perhaps quickly, is, for instance, one thing which we've struggled with is in relation to the Great Green Wall in Sub-Saharan Africa. And it was the result of academics and the scientific community at those different countries, in Burkina Faso and Ouagadougou, and different countries, that enabled us to create the networks to capture fog, to water the Great Green Wall, which, so therefore your efforts are really applauded. And perhaps if I can add with a quick question for Dr. Walid on infrastructure and the work that you have. This is something which we're struggling with because the infrastructure is very capital intensive, and a lot of the discussions on damage and loss, on other related matters in relation to the climate dialogue talks about how do we rebuild better, and what kind of innovations would help save the day. The scientific community saved the day 2 years ago when we had COVID, when we had panicked, when we had projections saying that a big chunk of the global population would suffer. But then science came by, we have new vaccines, multiple vaccines to help us. So how can you rescue this planet, madams and misters who are responsible for the scientific community? Great question.
No, thank you very much for your contribution, Dr. Walid.
Yes, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So very, very good question. So I think as scientists, we do lots of things to help actually this direction. But the whole idea, there is a big gap between industry and I think the academia. And I think the government rules should be the one to bridge both. Okay, so we have lots of good solutions. I talked about sustainability, how those kind of infrastructure would have minimal, environmental impact. We have lots of ideas. And how also the climate as a whole kind of integrated system to be part of our design, our operation. And I think over years also, maybe in Europe, USA, worldwide, we have some also good tools in order to capture this impact. So for example, in transportation system, building transportation systems, we have tools to include the climate change, daily changes, annual changes, how they will impact based on, I would say, billions of dollars or euros or whatever funded research over years. So now this kind of cumulative knowledge, we have now some very good tools. Maybe industry doesn't know about, and this is why we're trying to have ambassadors, our students, master and PhD, to be engaged with industry, to basically spread this knowledge in a much better way and effective way. But yes, we have tools, we have policies, we have strategies that could help the industry in achieving some of these goals, to build, as I said, resilience into the climate change and to minimize their environmental impact. And I think if I talk about this, we would need some workshops run for days and days to cover this topic. But yes, we have lots of tools and lots of ideas on how to basically have some adaptive solutions to minimize impact of climate change on infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walid. And so I think we have time for one more question, if anybody would be interested.
I have it.
Oh,
I have the mic.
please go on ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maysam Al-Koush. I am part of the Arab Youth Council on Climate Change, and I am an AUS environmental science graduate. Dr. Faten actually was one of my professors. So I'm very happy to see this come to life, and I echo what Raidan is saying about how impressive all the work is. I have two questions and a contribution. So the contribution is, I think it's a great idea to involve youth, and as someone who's sitting on the Youth Climate Council, so I think it makes sense that we connect as well. So my first question is, okay, now that the research is done and it's published, etc., how can we contribute to the private sector? So this is the first thing, in an attempt to try to close the loop. So let's say the research was on the importance of getting one of the solutions. So maybe we can incorporate that into the private sector. And my other question is, in case someone is interested to participate or contribute towards the research, is there some sort of another network or like a wider network where we can not just invite youth, but anyone who has a passion for research and has some time on their hand to contribute? Thank you.
Thank you very much as well for the question, and I think I can actually answer this one on behalf of the network. So one of the major things that you mentioned here as well is just having that wider contribution and having somebody be able to support even from outside of the streams of these 5 research clusters. And we're happy to know that the network does in fact involve 3 different divisions that do allow for this type of work. Our main one, which we've been talking about up until now and have been working a lot to try to develop, was the 5 research clusters. But further to this, we have the youth division, and we have another one which is for advisors. And this advisory operates from anybody who has an interest or has a stake in climate change that's looking towards supporting in terms of this type of transition. So again, just having researchers who have expertise in different fields or in different areas that are willing to support, we're very happy to have them contribute. And even those who want to work and support from external to the network as well, there's always an open stream of communication between the actual members themselves and anybody externally who could then support in terms of any work that comes into the network.
Can I conclude with one last question? Thank you. So I'm also a member of the Arab Youth Council for Climate Change, and each member of us actually working in their own projects. And something you've mentioned is that the UAE and also the Arab region is suffering from water scarcity and water depletion. And the project, accidentally actually, thank you for mentioning that, is also focusing on that area. And briefly, it's about extracting water from the humidity or the air, and then like for commercial use and people use. And that is due to the fact that we live in a very hot and humid area, as well as an area that is suffering from water scarcity. However, when I was working on the project, I saw Chinese companies producing such machines and American companies. And I guess my question would be, how is the UAE or the Gulf region specifically doing so far in this technology? And how would the research network, if you're being humble enough to help me with this project to be practical and actually implemented in our daily life? Like, I don't want to see this project only on malls and so on. I want them to see implemented on roofs of the top of the roofs of our houses, just like the solar panels. How can we collaborate on that, and how the UAE is doing so far in this technology? Thank you.
Would you like to make
I can.
Sure.
Thank you very much for the question, and it's a pleasure to see that there is so much interest in the research, especially from the youth. I cannot speak for the cluster lead, but one of the things that I can tell you is that the network, and I need to take Shema for this and definitely Mona for this, they are working so hard on getting partnerships as well, on connecting not only with scientists, but also with industries and experts. And I believe that that is one of the ways that we can try and connect. There is some missing gaps, and I feel that this is one of the main challenges, that we have some gaps in between, but trying to connect the members, the ministry, the governmental entities with also the partners, that is, I think, where we can collaborate. So our projects basically don't go to waste, but we have actually a setting where maybe these plans can be implemented as well. So I see some opportunities, definitely.
Yeah, if I may jump in on the specific of this technology that you're talking about. CCRN is not a development entity. We don't do technological development. But for example, we could discuss about looking at data for which are, within the UAE, the optimal places where this technology can work. In fact, I completely agree with you. It's a shame that this technology has not been yet developed and deployed on large scale in the UAE, because that's a place where it should really be able to work. And I agree with you that it's a shame that, I don't know, Chinese companies are producing that in places where that kind of technology probably is not so promising, and no one in the UAE, as far as I know, no company is working on that in the UAE. So what we can do is provide scientific support, data, modeling, where these things have the most likelihood to succeed, what is the possible yield, all these sort of things. We can talk maybe later on.
Thank you very much for your point. One of the objectives of our clusters is to empower the scientists, to empower the youth. So I really highlight here the point that you need to communicate with the cluster lead that is responsible about this specific sector, and try to communicate the information, because we are looking for youth that they have innovative solutions, and we need to implement them. So we can work together to make this a real thing. Thank you.
Thank you all for the contribution. I'm afraid that we're also a little bit low on time here. But we're happy to also carry this discussion just as well afterwards if possible. The only thing I want to also comment on this one is that we do also sometimes hold a sequence of webinars, and one of the webinars that we had did have a company called Manhat, who happens to be one of our partners, that does exactly what you're referring to there, which is the extraction of water from the air as well, in the process of trying to just increase our water acquisition. So if you're interested in this as well, I'm very happy to put you in contact with them, and they operate directly in the UAE, so there's a lot that we could do in that regard. Right? I also want to thank everybody here, our co-chairs, our cluster leads, for joining us for this session. We've run a little bit over time, so if anybody does have any additional questions, I'm sure if anybody on the chairs is willing to have that discussion, I'm sure we'll be open to it. But again, thank you everybody for joining us. If you're interested in coordinating with the CCRN in the future, if you're looking forward towards just working with us or interacting with us, you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly. You can find us at ccrn@moccae.gov.ae. So that's ccrn@moccae.gov.ae. You can also find us on the ministry's website. There's a lot of information there, and if you can just reach out to any of us directly, we're very happy to put you in touch with the right people. So with that, I'd like to adjourn the meeting today, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.